Hey, how are you today? This is Josh Patrick, and we are cracking the cash flow code. And today, my guest is Lenore Horton from Horton Legal Strategies. She is an expert in what we call green partnerships or green friendships, where we form partnerships to go into business with our friends. And partnerships, whether it's a green partnership or an old partnership, or it's just an issue that, if not done right, can be a real disaster. And if it is done right, can be a wonderful form of business. So let's bring Lenore on and we'll start the conversation. Hey, Lenore, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for coming on. So I'm kind of interested. The term green is a green partnership. That's the term you use?
Well, I really say look for green flags. A lot of times people talk
Green
about,
flags.
oh, that was a red flag. And I say, well, another way of putting it is what are the green flags that you should look for?
Okay, so what might a green flag, can you give me an example of what that might be?
I think a good thing if you're thinking about going into business or developing a business partnership with a friend is think about the history of your friendship and what that tells you about going into business with them. We're allowed to love our friends, even if even if there are parts of them that, from a business standpoint, we may say, oh, I don't know if I want to be in business with them. So it's okay to see a friend for who they are and love them if they're a little bit petty or gossipy, or if they're sometimes absent and not available, that's fine. That's great. If that works for you and your friendship, and I certainly have friendships where that shows up, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the friendship. But if you're thinking of going into business, think about what your history of the friendship tells you about how they might show up if you layer a business component in there. So in that respect, what's the go flags? Like what's the go signs for saying this will work out or this is likely to work out from a business perspective? If I see that someone has a good work ethic, I think that is going to tell me, okay, even though they're a friend, they might be good to be in business with as well. I have one friend where she was in a really toxic and caustic environment at work, and she still gave it her all. As much as she may have had problems with the founders, really the executive team, she never wanted it to compromise how her clients felt. And so she still gave it her all. Now, if I were to ever have a chance to go into business with her later on, I would think to myself, well, I really liked how the history of my friendship with her taught me that she can take differences and put them to the side and not let it affect customer service. And so I think that's one thing to think about is if you're going to go into business with them, what does your friendship, that history of your friendship tell you about how they treat business matters or might treat business matters?
Well, wouldn't you want to be a little bit more specific? If I'm going into business with a friend, it's almost like having a marriage. I mean, it's not, obviously an intimate relationship, but it's a very, very close relationship, and you have to work well with these folks. So, I mean, just because someone has a great work ethic doesn't mean they're going to be a great partner.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Even in the example I gave, there she had an issue with the executives. She had a great work ethic. It didn't stop the issue with the executives of the company that she had. So, some other things I would say to look out for the history of the friendship is is this a friend who's present? Do they tend to be present? Do they are there moments where they're just not available? How do they prioritize things in their life? Are they a bit gossipy? Are they the kind of person who is just routinely chaotic? I would say if you've got good signs there, those are green flags, but it's not everything. So there are other things I think you have to look at. One is, for example, conflict resolution. That's another area where you can look at green flags and see, will this work out? So I tell people it's great if you can come to consensus, but how does this person behave when you don't have an agreement? You want to be in business with someone where if there is a disagreement, there's a way for things to still move forward professionally. If there's a disagreement, will they, and you're, it's an area where the two of you have decided that you're to take leadership in that area and that you're to make the final decision, will they respectfully support and work with you to advance that position, even if were it their call, they would have gone in a different direction? I think that's really important. Your description of it as a marriage in a way is not actually that far off. In a lot of circumstances, once you're in business with someone else, you can't leave without their permission or without a court saying that you can. So it's a big deal, and I think business divorce is a pretty apt way of putting it when things don't work out. So that's how serious it is. It's not. It's a lot more layered into it than a friendship where you could really just walk away.
Okay, so I have another question for you. You've been talking about, the other in the partnership and looking for green flags. What about looking at yourself and your behavior and whether you're going to make a good partner before you even go
Mm.
down that road? And I know lots of business owners who are solo business owners, and there's a reason there's a solo business owner because they
Right.
are lousy at playing in the sandbox. They don't do it very well. So, how about looking at
Yeah.
yourself a bit?
I say definitely. These are relationships. I think the theme here is that it's just because it's a business context does not mean it's not a relationship. But I also like to say that it's the relationship we have with ourselves that matters the most. And that means having the ability to see yourself for who you are and to have a level of acceptance of who you are and what you bring to the table and what you truly want. Um, whether you're a good partner and should you go into business with someone, um, think about why you want that partner. Is it real? What are your reasons for wanting a partner in the business? And is it best achieved through a business partnership, through having another owner in the business? Or is there another way you can achieve those goals? Because maybe having a co founder or a co owner is not going to be the best way.
So I have another thing which comes up a lot. I often get at the end of the partnership, not the beginning of the partnership. And one of the things I think people might want to think about a bit is age differences. And to
Mhm.
talk about those age differences before you even start your partnership. If you have a 10 or a 15-year difference, you might be great friends. You might have really good complementary styles, but there's an age difference. And when you start the business and you're running the business, it's great until that senior person might want to leave the business and you stay in because now you've gone from having a common thing into there's really two different needs that start to appear, 20, 25 years down the road.
Yeah, I like the idea of people considering succession planning from the very beginning, especially when they have a business partner. In any case, whether they do or don't have a business partner, to think about what's the continuation? What does continuation look like if someone else leaves the business or if you leave the business? And with an age difference, for some people, it could work out well. It could actually be something desirable. It's maybe a natural way of starting a business before they perhaps feel ready to do it on their own. And then people can have ideas that there's a built in uh, successor, like an acknowledged successor or heir apparent for who will lead the business. But I wouldn't want to assume it. It's a conversation that has to be had. I think you'd agree that there has to be a conversation about it to make sure that you really are on the same page. I think a big part of that is also what is the real leadership consensus? A lot of times people say 50-50. And I have big issues with 50-50. I have big issues with anything that can present a voting block, right? Um, I think people have to really decide who is going to be the leader of the business, who gets to drive decisions forward, in most aspects or in all aspects when there's a disagreement? Whose say has the most weight?
It might be who has the most money that goes in also.
Yeah, yes, how that business gets capitalized and how we value what people are bringing to the table in the beginning will probably play the largest role. But a lot of times people punt this down the road. They don't want to make that decision, or they say, but we are really good at making decisions now and we agree on everything. And my theory is that the history of every breakup goes a little bit like this: it's all good until it's not. That's the history of every breakup. Like, literally, it was all good until it wasn't. And so you really have to not wait until it's not good. You can't rest on saying, but everything's great now, and assume that that means it will always be like that. So I'm the kind of person who says really avoid those voting blocks, avoid that even split, because it's not really making a decision about who is the leader of the business. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of times when I work with companies and they have investors come on board, they won't tolerate the splits. They want someone who will be the definitive leader so that their investment doesn't go to waste if there is infighting amongst the leadership.
Yeah, there's something which I think is really important. What I'm going to call it, again, we'll call it a green issue that someone needs to consider, which is if both people going into business have the same skills, that's a terrible partnership. But if both people going into the
Yeah.
business have complementary skills, those are the partnerships I see that really, really work well. It's when you've got, people who do the same thing and they might even do it in the same way, but you've
Mhm.
got this giant hole in the business that needs to be filled by somebody.
Yes. And that's also about knowing your own self and what you bring to the table and what your strengths are and your weaknesses are. I remember my first full-time hire years and years ago. I said I have to hire for the areas that I am just not very good at. And I hired someone with an infinite amount of patience because at the time I realized I was the kind of person where at that point in my life it was I could react easily and I could write people off easily. I'm a little bit telling on myself right now. But I knew I wanted someone who could be a bit reflective and give people a chance. And so in ways it really made me confident, more confident in some of my decisions in that space, because I knew that if they were on board, then I knew I wasn't in the extremes, right? I knew I wasn't on the margins when I made a call in that area where I felt I could use some balancing if they were in agreement with me on making that call. So I agree, and whether you have things formalized so that someone is recognized as an owner of a business, or you set it up in a different way where it is difficult to extricate them from the business, you are in partnership, right? And that is a reality when it comes to how your business runs and the value of it. I tell people, don't, yes, you have to consider the legal components, but there are other ways you go into partnership with people, even without your documentation set up that way. And I think having people where in total you bring the full package that you're looking for, or almost all of the full package. If you're just duplicating what each other has to offer, you almost set yourself up to compete against each other, and then you might have some conflict issues down the line, or recognition of who is the leader down the line.
So there's a book called Traction by a guy named Gino Wickman. And in there,
I
he
have it
describes
here.
Okay. In there, he describes the entrepreneurial operating system, which is a really good system to run a business by if you have, that's the book, if you have less than a couple of hundred employees. And in there, he talks about having a visionary and an integrator. And when I look at partnerships, I always ask myself the question, who's the visionary in this partnership and who's the integrator in this partnership? And if
Mhm.
I don't have both, I would probably tell somebody this is not going to be a great partnership because you don't have the right skill set going in. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
It does. It really does. And a big part of it is also recognizing why you're matching yourselves up that way, right? You can't get frustrated at the visionary for being a visionary when you're the one who is implementing. If
Yes.
that's the function that they're serving, you have to be careful about starting to view them as someone who is in the way of progress of implementation because they're too busy dreaming of the next idea. And at the same time, that visionary has to be careful about viewing the person who is the designated implementer as someone who is incapable of seeing the broader picture. So, a lot of it is also about recognition of the talents and just remembering why you matched up with that person to begin with. This is sounding more and more like a relationship, right?
Well, here's what I've learned over the years, and this is true if you have a company of 5 people or a company of 500 people, is that the senior
Mhm.
leadership team, and actually through the entire company, it's really important for the leaders to teach respect and appreciation for the skills that you don't have. You may hate them. You may hate what they do. You may hate how you have to deal with them, but you have to
Mhm.
respect them because they're each really important in a business success. And that,
Right.
it's just in a lot of partnerships break up because they don't do that well.
Yeah, I think, one good thing is to develop this sense of curiosity about the parts of you that are not developed and that don't have the skills, not for the purpose of mastering it, but for connecting with the people who actually have those skills. And then that leads to the ability to be more appreciative of those around you and what they bring to the table that you don't have. And a part of that is just not being competitive, right? I'm surprised at the situations where you start to see people competing with others over time. And I think if you're going into business, it can't be a competition amongst yourselves. It really does have to be about complimenting and appreciating the the parts of you that work well with another but doesn't duplicate them. And that's for the team as a whole.
So, how important do you think it is to have in your partnership agreement how you're going to break the partnership apart if it doesn't work when you start? I know people don't want to think about that, but I kind of
Yeah.
call that the prenup for business.
Yeah, I think you want to have some ground rules. Like, do you want this to be think about how it might unfold. And there's always the ideal. We're going to exit and this is how we're going to leave the business, but also life happens. People get in a car wreck and they decide to change their life because they're maybe deciding they're on the wrong path or other things happen that intervene. Um, so you want to think about what about the scenario that is not ideal? What's the second best? And then what's the shadow sides of those? The ones that you hope it doesn't end that way, but how can you plan now so if that is what happens, it's happening in a way that works for you. So I tell people think about do you are you okay with it being public? Some people absolutely would never want it public, right? They would want to move it towards some sort of arbitration or mediation and keep it in a confidential proceeding. Now, just because you're in court doesn't mean that it can't be confidential. You have the ability to a certain degree, to seek to seal records and things like that. But there may be some important considerations for deciding that you want to move it to arbitration as opposed to having it in a court proceeding that is subject to the requirement for public access, right? you may decide that you want to layer in a mandatory mediation option, right? Where there's a third party mediator who looks to try to bring things to a resolution before it moves towards um, a a fact finder and a final decider, whether that's an arbitrator and binding arbitration or a court process. Um, do you want to have a period of time where you are required to negotiate face to face in good faith, and then it goes to the mediator, and then it goes either to arbitration or to court? Do you want to make it where only certain things go through this process? For example, if you're fighting about, money issues in the business as opposed to control over the business. So there's a lot of ways to consider it, because it could just be, well, if you're just fighting about money and not really about control, then you may decide to make that a different type of process, right? As opposed to sweeping it all and saying it's all disputes, it's all a conflict. Let's resolve all of it the same way.
So, Lenore, there's one more I have one time for one more really fast topic, which could be two shows all by itself, but we're going to try to get to it quickly. And that's, I love the term of green, whatever you're going to call it, green shoots, green friendships, green partnerships, whatever you want to call it. But the reason I like it so much is you're focusing on what's going to work, not what's going to not work. And with attorneys, now you folks tend to focus on the downside, not the upside, because that's where people end up in your office. But the truth is, the really, really, really great companies that I'm aware of focus on their strengths, build on them,
Mhm.
and manage their weaknesses. And we could probably apply that to partnerships, I would think.
Yes, it's I can understand why lawyers come from this standpoint. I used to be a litigator, and I still litigate. What am I talking about? Used to be. I'll have a few clients calling me saying, "Hey," um, but I used to only do litigation, and now I do much more than that. And so it's very easy to start thinking of all the ways things can go wrong, but it's it's a place of fear is just not where you want to be when making things happen in your business. Fundamentally, I feel like entrepreneurship, forming businesses, moving businesses forward, growing them, you're creating jobs, you're helping people send their kids to college and save for retirement. This is major. You're helping them afford health care and care for themselves and others. And there is an element of hope and promise in there. And what you want to do is shore it up with planning and more than just hope and promise. But fundamentally, it is, I think if there is a fear that is valuable, it would be the fear of not living up to your biggest promise and your and the fear of missing the miracle that can happen if you go for it. And in that respect, yes, I say let's make it green. Let's make it a go thing as opposed to a watch out thing.
Cool. Hey, Lenore, unfortunately, we are out of time, and I'm going to assume that some folks listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook would love to have a conversation with you about forming a partnership they're thinking about or fixing a partnership they already have. So, how would they go about finding you?
Yeah, you can go on the web, hortonlegalstrategies.com. And you can also send us an email at hello@hortonlegalstrategies.com.
Cool. That's a great thing to do. And this is the 352nd time you've heard me to say this. It really is, because this is episode 352. So wherever you're listening to this podcast, please give us an honest rating and review. That's an honest rating and review. And while you're at it, subscribe. We do a conversation like this every single week. And boy, folks that listen on a regular basis have told me this is just a really valuable time they spend. You can even listen to while you're driving to work, because we call this the commute cast. And the second thing I'd like you to do is I have written two books. My second book is at a deal right now on our book website, which is www.salereadycompany.com. If you go to that site, you can get my book for $7.95 instead of $14.95 on Amazon. And we have 5 or 6 bonuses, which are ebooks and reports that tell you how to implement what's in the book, because the book is a business parable where we have a fictional family having real problems that I see every day, and you're probably going to see some of your own problems that exist in there. And if you're really brave, you get to have a free 20-minute conversation with me where I will guarantee you that you're going to have at least one piece of take home value that you can apply in your business when you get off the phone. So this is Josh Patrick with Lenore Horton. You're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I hope to see you back here really soon.
Thanks so much, Josh.